Hello and welcome to Red's Business and Technology Podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Barnes.
And I'm your co-host, Brad Ferris.
And today we're sitting down with a cybersecurity expert, Ashwin Ram, who's a cybersecurity evangelist from the office of the CTO at Checkpoint Software Technologies. Today we'll be uncovering everything going on in cybersecurity. He's actually up in Brisbane for BrizSec, which is on tomorrow as we record this one. The topic is nailing the first 100 days as a CISO or Chief Information Security Officer. Ashwin, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
No problems. Mate, let's start with your background. So what did you do way back, technical-wise, study, evolving as you get to what you're doing now?
Sure. I started off doing computer science at uni and then got my first gig while actually was studying as a help desk analyst, and then sort of worked my way up into becoming a senior analyst. And I think about 15 years ago, I had my first crack at working for a security integrator here in Australia, Loop Technologies. And that was my first experience delivering professional services. So designing and implementing security solutions and upgrades, migrations, cutovers, that sort of stuff. And then about 13 years ago, I joined Checkpoint as a junior professional services consultant. Did that for about 4 years. Again, migration work, upgrades, designing network, security solutions, and then moved into pre-sales and looked after telco, healthcare, and financial services for a few years. Started running the pre-sales business for Checkpoint for the northern region for a couple of years. And then about 4 years ago, I got a tap on the shoulder saying, hey, why don't you come and join this brand new team that we've created called the Cybersecurity Evangelist Group. And your role will be to go and evangelize cybersecurity at cybersecurity conferences, podcasts such as this, talk to media, write white papers. And that's been what I've been doing for the last 4 years.
All right, awesome. Looking forward to getting some insights to you. It's definitely something you specialize in by the sounds of it. Why did you pivot into cybersecurity?
It was something that fascinated me. You know, initially, when I started understanding networking, I just found it really fascinating. And then the cybersecurity was just something that it just happened. It was just an evolution. It wasn't like a decision. I just happened to evolve into it. Yeah, and I absolutely love it.
Tell us a bit about Checkpoint Software Technologies. What do they do?
Sure. So Checkpoint is a powerhouse in the cybersecurity space. We started life about 30 years ago. Our founder actually wrote the software that enables stateful inspection within firewalls. Now, that was 30 years ago. And as the threat landscapes evolved, so has Checkpoint to keep our customers safe. So we now not only provide full stack of network security, but also cloud security, endpoint security, no matter where the users are, user security, as well as email security. Apart from all of those different types of controls, we also provide SOC as a service. We provide incident response capabilities. We help organizations carry out crisis management and crisis simulation through tabletop exercises. So we really provide security and security capabilities for quite a holistic approach.
Almost end-to-end security operations.
It is indeed end-to-end, yeah.
And how many people in the business and what kind of businesses do you work with?
Sure. So we have about 6,500 people, I think, now.
Yeah, right.
And our R&D, research and development, is based out, and our headquarters is based in Tel Aviv, Israel. We also have a big office, a big number of employees in the States. But we also have offices around the world, including here in Brisbane. We have an office in Sydney, Melbourne. We have an office in Perth, as well as Wellington, Auckland.
Yeah, right.
So that's our region here.
How big in Australia? How many people?
Probably about 110.
Yeah, okay.
It's a big operation, massive operation actually worldwide. Cool.
That's huge. To be honest, we don't hear much about Checkpoint, so I'm excited to hear a bit more about what you're seeing.
No, marketing is not our strong point.
So who's your competitors? Maybe that would probably help.
Our competitors would be Cisco, Palo Alto, Fortinet. They're the big ones.
The hardware.
Look, all of those guys
like
have also
Sentinel
evolved.
One, CrowdStrike.
Those two.
All those guys. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Zscaler, they come to mind as well. So they're all competitors. Even the niche players, because again, we do endpoint security. We do a full stack of endpoint security as well, complete EDR capabilities on the endpoint. So all those endpoint players are our competitors. We do incident response, and so incident responders are
And
our
SOC.
competitors. SOC as a service.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You've got a lot of competitors because
Yeah.
you, I guess, touch a lot of, I guess, solutions
Yeah,
in
so
cybersecurity.
at the end of the day, if an organization is looking for holistic cybersecurity capability, and if they're actually looking to partner with one or two security vendors that become their partner rather than just a vendor, then Checkpoint should be one of those no-brainers.
Okay. Ashwin, tell us a bit about what you're seeing, how the threat landscape's evolving, and some interesting stuff that you're seeing recently.
Well, of recent, I think the most pressing topic right now is the threat landscape of artificial intelligence. That is quite concerning. The misuse of artificial intelligence is very concerning. When ChatGPT, for example, came out, one of the teams that get really excited whenever there's hype in media is our security researchers, because they know that cyber criminals are also going to be looking at this to try and figure out how they can weaponize it. And so we started asking the same question, like, is it possible to weaponize ChatGPT? And the initial question we thought of asking when we started our POC was, hey, can you create a phishing email? We used the word phishing email, and it did. We actually asked it to create a phishing email from a fictitious company, created that, even gave us a placeholder for the fake login page. All right, and then then we thought, okay, well, maybe that's going to take us too long. Let's change the tactic. Why not just ask it to create a phishing email and ask the intended target to double click or open a weaponized document? So it wrote that for us too. Then we thought, all right, well, let's create that weaponized document. So we asked for it to create a script for reverse shell. It did that for us too. And then we're like, okay, well, if we're going to go that far, well, what about, can we create some tools for reconnaissance? So we're like, can you please create a tool for port scanning? It did that for us too. And then we're like, well, let's try and build some smarts into these tools. Can you write a script for us that would help bypass Sandbox? It did that for us too.
Yeah, scary.
Right, so that's basically what we're seeing at the moment. And now that's our POC, and we created hundreds of tools just as a POC, just to see. But we also have noticed that threat actors are doing the same thing, of course, right? They're creating tools, they're sharing ideas. One of the interesting things we found is threat actors are actually writing tutorials on how other threat actors could use ChatGPT. We've seen threat actors share insights into how you could bypass OpenAI, which is the platform organization that owns ChatGPT. We've seen threat actors share on Telegram and various different dark web forums how to bypass those geolocations using compromised phone numbers and SIM cards. So that's the really interesting stuff that we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, it's quite scary because it definitely was, like, I think 5+ years ago, threat actors you'd see, if you see just a phishing email come out, it was always broken English and like unstructured properly. But now that's going to be completely gone because threat actors can easily just get something to write an email for them, and it makes it look very, very slick. So that's, I guess, a concern.
Jackson, you're absolutely right. Here's what was really interesting. As I was reading that research, I thought I decided to do some research of my own, and I actually asked ChatGPT some very specific questions. And one of those questions was, have you ever created a phishing email? It denied it. So I thought, you know what? Maybe it needs a little bit of the memory needs to be jogged. So I gave it specific fake, the fake account that it had used, or the fake service provider that it had used in the phishing email. It still denied that, and for me, that sort of takes us to a slightly different topic of trustworthiness in AI as well. How do we trust a platform that is not designed to tell us the whole truth?
That's a funny one, actually. I hadn't really thought about that.
That's a scary one, isn't it?
Yeah, that is scary. Another interesting story you mentioned off air, which I think is worth sharing on the episode, was a threat actor being in an environment for 5 years before being detected or Checkpoint picked it up. Do you want to go through that in more detail?
Yeah, sure. That was in 2019. It was an interesting case where our incident response team got engaged by a government agency in Asia to assist with an attack. And while we were going through the logs and trying to understand what's going on with this government agency, we noticed there was a completely separate attack happening from that environment. And so whilst we had our hands full here, we reached out to our Israeli researchers, the malware researchers, and asked them to take a look at this completely separate attack that was happening. And what we found was really interesting, actually. This threat actor had been in stealth mode for about 5 years. No security researchers had talked about them.
5 years.
5 years, right? Previous to that, the last time anyone had ever mentioned this was Kaspersky, and that was 5 years earlier. So 5 years stealth mode, and what we were able to do is not only identify who this threat actor was, we were able to then map out their entire infrastructure. So we've published all of this stuff, and what we found is that they'd already compromised government agencies in various parts of Asia, including Philippines, Myanmar, Singapore, as well as Thailand, Laos, and it was only when they were attacking an Australian state government here that we actually found them. And like I said, we mapped out the entire infrastructure. I've actually been following them. I'd followed them for a while anyway, and I noticed that they actually started focusing on India and Turkey, which is quite interesting as well. What other thing that we found quite interesting is they had compromised a server within one of the government agencies in Asia and used it as a backup command and control server in their malware. So that was quite interesting.
Jeez. Bold. Yeah, they're definitely getting bold. I wanted to get some of your insight, and I know you're up in Brisbane and then I guess touring around Australia speaking about nailing the first 100 days as a CISO or Chief Information Security Officer. Mm-hmm. Let's start with this question, and we'll actually get some insights from this. What's the importance of a competent CISO in a business?
Yeah, so have you seen the headlines lately?
No, tell me more.
I mean, organizations are getting breached left, right, and center here, right? I mean, we've got our federal government talking about it. I think more than half of our population's private information has already been leaked out. So clearly, there's a need for organizations to mature the cybersecurity capability. And what a CISO does is their primary role is to actually bridge the gap between the technical and the business stakeholders, right? Because ultimately, when we think about cybersecurity, we think about those technical guys who are actually implementing the policies and the rules, but really that needs to be driven from the business level. But ultimately, the goal of cybersecurity is to reduce risk, so the business can do whatever it is that they're trying to, the product or service that they're trying to deliver, and to be able to do that, to be able to get the respect and the sponsorship from executives, you need to demonstrate the value that cybersecurity is going to bring to your organization or the risk that it's going to reduce. And the best role for that is a CISO or a CISO.
So what size business needs a CISO? Because I feel like the common thing in Australia, and maybe this is everywhere, is that businesses have a CFO, they may have an IT manager, and then maybe a risk officer or a risk manager, and then maybe a CIO, depending on size. How does a business determine when you actually need to put a dedicated CISO in place?
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule here, right? I think there are a lot of organizations that don't have a CISO, but they have somebody that's doing the CISO role, right? That may be the head of IT, head of network security, right? They inherit the responsibility of whoever's responsible for cyber strategy, and so you don't necessarily have to have the title to be able to deliver on that. But to answer your question in terms of who should, I think any organization that's actually concerned about a breach, concerned about their brand name, concerned about their reputation, right, should think about investing in a CISO or CISO. And why would be, there are studies that have actually shown if you have a chief information security officer in your organization, the impact of a breach is far less on average than if you don't.
It's a good point. I mean, cyber risk is the likelihood of being attacked, and the impact if you do get attacked is essentially cyber risk for businesses. One thing I wanted to go down, and you touched on it, was stakeholder engagement or stakeholder management as a CISO being the most important thing, which sounds simple, but it's a really complex thing, right? Because you've got people who are non-technical, like CFOs and CEOs, who say, where are we at from a cyber point of view? And you're probably IT managers and network engineers, system admins who go, we got these things, we need more tools. And they're the kind of conduit between that, your IT team traditionally, and then the actual, people who have the risk associated to them, and, directors being liable for if they do get hit, that kind of stuff. What advice would you have for an upcoming CISO or CISOs that are trying to get into that role around that stakeholder management?
So firstly, I don't think there's any clear path to becoming a CISO. You have some CISOs who come from a technical background, right? And you have some CISOs who come from a risk compliance and governance background as well. So I think it's important to understand that the role of CISO, there's not one prerequisite for that. Right? Now, in terms of the importance of stakeholder management, ultimately, the success of a CISO is dependent on how well they forge meaningful relationships with key stakeholders. Your brand name and your credibility is everything if you're to succeed in this role. It's not a technical role. The most important thing that a CISO needs to do is be able to articulate the technical requirements to be able to enable business outcomes. Everything hinges on that. If you're able to demonstrate to an organization why they need to invest in cyber, what are the business outcomes? And the business outcomes doesn't necessarily need to be risk reduction. It could actually be competitive outcome as well. Right. So I'll give you one example. Those organizations that invested in remote access technology that enabled their employees to be able to work from home, right, they generally did much better than those organizations who didn't allow employees to work from home when COVID hit. Right? It was a far easier move for employees to work remotely.
But where is the business optimization there? Is that because they can work remotely securely is why the CISO comes into play?
Well, what I'm saying is that your cyber strategy needs to enable business outcomes. In this particular case, what I'm saying is that, there's a competitive advantage if you're actually able to be agile because you can work remotely, as opposed to those organizations that may not have invested in remote security, remote access controls, right? Securely. So if you're not enabling employees to work remotely, and if you expect everyone to come in and work from the office, when COVID-19 hit and we had that lockdown, a lot of organizations struggled with being able to move employees. Many of them didn't even have laptops for employees, right? We had a case where a lot of employees were using personal devices to access corporate resource. Yep. Who's securing those personal devices?
And there was a big phase 5 years ago around people going to thin clients and NUCs and that kind of thing because they were like, oh, this is the way to go. Then COVID probably got stung a little bit. I wanted to go on the path around that CISO creating a 100-day plan. But Brad, do you have any questions before I get there?
Yeah, I was just going to say we have had other people on the podcasts in the past talking about this, and they have seen, a competitive advantage in employing cybersecurity controls, pitching for government work, government tenders, we're more secure, therefore we're more likely to get the work. Do you see that much in your travels?
I do, yes. I mean, that's clearly another advantage that you have, right, is if you can demonstrate that you're more secure. I mean, think about it, right? Third-party breaches that we're seeing nowadays, right, where the threats are actually coming in from those trusted business partners. So if you're not secure and you're doing business with that, we can't open up our systems and our networks to you. So being able to demonstrate that, yes, we do have a certain level of maturity in our cyber definitely gives you that advantage.
And that's a good point, yeah. And supply chain management as well. We are seeing that as well, probably on two sides, from a carbon neutral kind of perspective and a security perspective. The carbon neutral is not really relevant for this show, but definitely on a cyber perspective, like we've been asked as well by some of our potential clients what our posture is. But definitely I've heard from our clients that are now starting to ask their supply chain if they are also employing, upholding certain standards and frameworks, essential aid, NIST, all that kind of stuff.
Like Defence has been doing it for a while, but I think now, especially in Queensland, we've got like mining companies who supply certain services to mines, and then they're now starting to get questions around, do you meet these kind of frameworks or do you have these fundamentals in place? And that's something that's going to get more and more important. I want to get down the path of essentially what you're talking about tomorrow. How do you prepare before you start the role of a CISO? So say you're an upcoming CISO, you went from security analyst to CISO, your position, how do you prepare? What do you do?
No silver bullets here. So first of all, you can't over-prepare, right? So I would say first thing you need to do is research the company. understand the company, right? And that doesn't mean that you just read the annual report. Go that one step further and look at the investor relationships and the investor publications that they have, because that gives you some really good insights into potential upcoming mergers, for example, right? Understand if the organization's been in the news for the wrong reason. Have they been breached? How many times have they been breached? Have they made money? I mean, if they're not financially doing well, then that's going to have a huge impact on your security budget.
They're probably not going to invest in cybersecurity if they're not making money, right?
Absolutely. And if they're doing mergers and acquisition, M&A, that has a massive impact on the landscape for your IT and cybersecurity as well. So understanding that is important. So do your research. I think the other thing, before you even take on that role, is it's important to have prior relationship with third-party incident responders, because there's no guarantee that you take a CISO role that within the first couple of months you don't get breached.
Yeah, that's a good advice actually. And would you you would recommend networking with other people in the cybersecurity industry?
Absolutely. You need to have those prior relationship with external stakeholders, right? And in third-party incident responders is one of those. So those are some of the things I would recommend, right? Make sure you understand the organization you're going to. Make sure you during your interview process, in fact, I would position the fact that within the first 100 days, I want to carry out a tabletop exercise. And that kind of gives you the gauge of how serious are these guys about actually cyber or not.
Well, ask that question before you start?
Yeah, during the interview process.
Good. Qualify how serious they are about. I mean, if they're hiring a CISO, they're probably pretty serious about cybersecurity. But
well, you'd think so. You'd hope so.
Yeah, you'd hope so. That's for
the other thing you want to do is maybe speak to the previous CISO, understand why they left, what were their challenges.
Yeah, good advice. Probably could be reasons. Like I've recommended all these tools and broke down communicate. I could imagine. Next one I have for you was, how do you create a plan for your first 100 days as a CISO?
Well, Jackson, the good thing is that we don't have to create the plan. The framework's already being done.
Tell me more.
Right, so there's an organization called Cyber Leadership Institute, and so I'm using their framework to talk at BRISSEC tomorrow as well.
Cool.
So Cyber Leadership Institute provide a fantastic framework over 100 days. So they provide a 100-day plan on the key initiatives and tasks that a incoming CISO should invest in. And the reason they do that is because it's very easy to be caught up in all the noise. And before you know it, 100 days is up and you haven't actually done some of the really key, the important tasks, right? So let me just share with you some of the stuff that I can remember off the top of my head. One of them is, as you're starting, obviously you're doing your onboarding. So that you do your onboarding and make sure you have your regular catch-ups with your team leader and your whoever you're reporting to. Pencil in those things, and then I think it's also important to in the initial phase make sure you get access to all the critical systems that you have, such as risk registers that you may have. So you want to be able to make sure you've got access to all of the systems, subscribe to all the associations that you may need, for example, ASA and third party. It's important to also have a tribe, cybersecurity tribe, your tribe, right? So these are like-minded individuals who are trying to solve the same problem that you are. Now, cyber doesn't exist in isolation. Cyber is not a local problem or a regional problem. It's actually a global problem. So it's important that you find peers, industry peers across the globe who try to fix and address the same challenges that you are. Learn from them.
Where would you go to find a tribe around cybersecurity?
Well, so if in Australia, obviously, you've got ASA is a great example. My tribe is called the Cyber Leadership Institute, for example. Right. Okay. So there are various others, but CLI is the one that I'm part of.
Okay, good advice. And what things should you look out for? Say when you first start in the role, you get onboarded. What are you looking out for?
The next thing is to actually start understanding the environment. So it's important that you figure out what the current state is, but don't spend too much time understanding the current state. You want to also figure out where do you need to be? What's the target state? Where do I need to get to? So get your hands on previous pen tests, any gap analysis that's being done, any sort of assessment that's being done, any audit reports and compliance reports that are being done. Get your hands on those, understand those things, understand how risk is communicated in the organization, understand if you have any open risks currently, right, and schedule in regular time to catch up with teams that manage risk, because the thing about risk is that it changes over time. Right? So understanding risk, understanding how it's been communicated in the organization, those are key things. Also, now is the time to build relationships with key stakeholders. So identify who those key stakeholders are. Understand the different lines of chain that they have, the reporting lines that they have. So think of your general counsel, your legal team, your public relations team, your auditors, your SOC team, all of those different key stakeholders. Understand their challenges. What are the biggest 2-3 challenges from a cyber perspective? Right? Pencil in regular catch-ups with those guys, because they will be fundamental. They will be critical to your success of your cyber strategy.
It's good advice. So you would book a meeting essentially with like the CFO from a financial risk perspective. If there's a risk manager or a compliance manager, go and speak to them about where they're at now, what challenges they're facing. Is that what you?
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you're speaking regularly to your chief risk officer if you're lucky enough to have one.
Yeah.
Right. Make sure you're speaking to all of the key stakeholders of the different lines of business that generate revenue for your organization. Right? What are their challenges? And also, it's really important now that you're building those relationships to also understand, okay, what are those crown jewels that we have? What are those really important assets that we have? Not just the customer databases, but the critical infrastructure that we may have. So you may be a production house, you may be a water utility, right? So the different critical, those crown jewels are different for different organizations. Understand what they are. Evaluate the security controls that you have around them. The reality is that in the first 100 days, you're probably not going to get approval for a full-blown risk assessment. So it's important as an incoming CISO that you carry out a high-level risk analysis yourself to understand if the basics, the fundamentals are done, right? And generally what you want to do is understand if your controls are geared towards preventing attacks.
That's good advice, actually. I think definitely that's good advice to try and figure out where you're at now, and like what I guess from a risk perspective, financial, what makes them tick, what's keeping them up at night. And it's funny, it's something that we try and do as well when we like onboarding a customer we might be looking after IT for. We try and figure out what's actually important from them keeping their business operational perspective. Is it a control system? Is it this bit of software? Do they actually have IP that needs to be protected more so than just standard data? So that's really good advice. Something that we would do separately to CISO going in, but also good advice.
Yeah, one thing I would also add is understand if you have data classification in place, right? Asset classification. That will help you understand, if you're over investing in something that you don't need to, or if you're under investing in something that you must invest more in because it's critical to your business. So those things are really, really important as well.
So what does success look like as a first 100 days as a CISO? So you get to 100 days complete. What is success?
So far, what we've done is we've onboarded and we've sort of understand the current state, and we want to understand obviously what the target state is. Now, during that process, it's really important, first of all, to figure out if actually you have proper IT and cybersecurity governance in place, right? So, do you actually even have a cybersecurity charter? Have you mapped out what is your security vision? What is your security mission? What is your security scope? Who is responsible for cybersecurity? Who should be accountable for it? And who needs to be kept informed and who should be consulted? Right? So before we just go into what a cybersecurity success looks like, these are foundational stuff that must be done. Okay. Once you've got your head around that stuff, then now let's figure out what are those quick wins that we can demonstrate to the business, because ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, it's all about stakeholder management. And when we talk about stakeholder management, you want to be able to deliver value quickly. You want to earn the trust and the respect of your executives and the board. And you want to do that by delivering success. So identify key, maybe those quick wins. One of those quick wins could be something like a cybersecurity awareness training. Right? That could be easily outsourced to a third party. These days, there's plenty of cybersecurity awareness. Checkpoint offers one of those as well, by the way.
It's nice, well done.
Yeah. And so outsource that stuff and use the completion rate of or the participation rate of your awareness training as a metric to demonstrate to the board that at least now you're working on the culture of cybersecurity in your organization. So something simple like that.
So, go about you go.
Oh no, I didn't change topics. So not change topic a little bit. But I guess we're talking a lot. So obviously, we provide services more to SME, and it's just interesting hearing you talk about frameworks, principles, charters, vision, strategy, that kind of thing. And I just wanted your opinion, obviously with smaller businesses, and I think we touched on earlier, you know, what size business should have a CISO, and that's a bit difficult. But I was wondering your opinion, and there's a few different schools of thought, so just getting your opinion, but around that segregation of duties between effectively what is a risk management role to a CIO or whoever's head of technology also being responsible for risk. So there's an argument that you're kind of assessing yourself if you're kind of doing that role in a CIO or IT manager role. But, you know, these are the constraints that probably smaller businesses have that may not have the budget. So, yeah, just I guess what's my question? My question is ultimately, you know, what are your thoughts around, for smaller businesses, around someone kind of running the infrastructure side and kind of running the security side? I guess is a pretty broad question.
There's no simple answer to that.
That's the thing, right? Yeah, that's very just an opinion.
$1 million question.
It is. I think I wrote a paper on something similar. I think ultimately for small businesses, they need to understand: could they survive a 1 week downtime? Could they survive 2 weeks downtime?
Yeah, and it does become as simple as that. Like we've seen this a few times recently. So
and then understanding, you know, what is going to what investments are going to be required to ensure that they don't suffer those. I've got countless examples that I've seen as well of small businesses that just haven't survived. Yeah,
it's interesting. I really liked my background's in Big Four. I worked for EY for a number of years, and I quite like working with small to medium business because they don't quite have all the funding to have quite all the roles, but they've still got all the same issues that big businesses have, and just have to tackle them a bit more creatively sometimes.
More nimble.
Yes, exactly. So it's just an interesting one with security and where does that land. And we had a CFO on the show a little while ago, and some of it belongs in risk, the budget, if you like, and the responsibility. Some of it belongs on the risk side. Some of it belongs on the IT side. So it's just an interesting conversation of, yes, in a perfect world it would be completely segregated. I would consider it more on the risk and compliance, working with the auditors, working with those kinds of firms in a bigger business. But in a smaller business, it's just interesting that kind of crossover and where does that, segregation of duties is kind of a classic kind of frame in this scenario. So yeah, I was just wondering if you've seen and where that crossover is from a small to medium to a large that can actually do it properly.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. Right? I'm a firm believer that cyber is not an IT problem. It's a business risk.
Yep.
But not everybody has the luxury of having a chief risk officer.
Exactly.
Right. And so ultimately, sometimes these things fall on the responsibilities of the business owner itself.
Yep.
Well, and I think the big problem right now is if things go, say you're a small business with 50, maybe 100 employees, and you've got an IT manager, cyber always gets lumped with that person when the risk really should be with the CFO or director of the business, but they don't understand the technical side of it, so they lump it with the IT manager. How do you combat that problem?
So we feel IT managers feel really threatened because we feel like they're cornered, right? They're like, I've only got this much money to spend. I've got all these objectives or things I need to achieve with that budget. Now you're throwing this other thing in, and that's like you said, it's actually a business risk, but it's been lumped in with the IT manager. And quite often, we battle with this question: do we have a duty of care to go around that person if we see a substantial risk, but we feel it's being blocked? Do we have a duty of care? I mean, it's really none of our business at the end of the day. We're just trying to help, but. It's a very interesting dynamic that we find ourselves in dealing with small business in where is the line, because we do feel as tech providers, security providers, that we have a duty of care to really make sure that business understands the risk. And sometimes we don't feel like, depending on the person we interact with, we don't feel that we've fully been able to articulate that risk properly to the people who need to understand it in that business, and we'll get blocked. So it's just...
I think there's outliers, right? But I think that the core problem is that if you look at drivers, directors of businesses and CFOs and stuff, who they're actually liable for risk and profitability of the business.
Exactly.
But the decision making around what tools and people to partner with goes with an IT manager or a CIO. And there's outliers though. Some of those are really cyber savvy and across it. But generally, what the drivers of the IT manager in a small business, for example, or the one person that does IT. In small businesses is around how do I keep the lights on and how do I, get how do I get tools to save me time, right?
Yeah.
Understandably, because they are growing and have pains and they have people logging tickets with them and they want to get things operational so they look good and cyber's a thing on the side. And and when it comes in the day, if a business gets hit with ransomware and goes down, the IT manager's probably got to work a bit, get paid a bit of overtime. The director's liable for telling all the customers and so on. What's your advice
So I think
for that problem?
I think ultimately again it comes down to the same thing that I said before, right? Stakeholder management. How do you communicate effectively to the business owners about the risk to the business from a cyber perspective? And I think again this is why the CISO's role is so vital, because they are able to take those technical risks and translate it into business risk. And I think that's where, for those IT managers, I think that's what they need to do as well, is be able to translate those technical risks into business risks. And if they are unable to do that, that's where you guys come in.
What advice would you have for an IT manager who's struggling with that right now? So say they identify those gaps in the business, playing a bit of a CISO kind of role, right? A bit of title as an IT manager, they're responsible for a lot more things, and maybe they got help desk team and yada yada yada. What advice would you have for them on how to effectively communicate to stakeholders that, okay, we've got this gap. We have no vulnerability management running, no cyber awareness training, whatever it is, but they're like, no more budget for IT.
What I would say is the advice would be, first of all, make sure you understand your business. What business lines of business are generating revenue here, right? And what would be the business impact from a financial standpoint, because ultimately that's what stakeholders understand is finance, right? The impact from a financial loss point of view, right? So understand if this line of business was impacted and it would take us 2 days or 5 days to get the business back up, this is the actual impact financially. Are we able to withstand? And then let the key stakeholders make that decision. Okay, no, we need to invest more here, right? So I think that's one thing. The other thing that I think is really important for anybody that wants to be able to communicate effectively is to learn to tell stories, is to learn to effectively, hook your audience and be able to make an impact with your story. So, for example, if I'm talking to a healthcare, like a small clinic, right, I'll talk about the impact on the patient, right? And what does that mean? And so when you make that connection, I think it's a lot easier to sell your cyber strategy then, because you're not just asking because cyber is ultimately looked at as a cost center.
Until something happens.
Right? Even then, it's a cost center.
But looked at differently. Yeah, that's really good advice actually to understand where money's coming in, and if it paint that what if picture. If you identify a gap and you articulate it but if something comes in because we don't have this thing or this service in place or whatever it is, or we don't align to a frame, or whatever that is. This may happen, which results in this.
And also, I think it's important for the IT manager or whoever's trying to have that conversation to regularly catch up with the key stakeholders and let them know what's happening in the industry. What's happening with other businesses of the same size in the same industry.
Good advice. So Checkpoint Software, what direction is that business going in? Because obviously cybersecurity, definitely in Australia, has been a massive topic, and probably all around the world, and over the last 6 to 9 months. And you see a lot of threats, and you do fairly intense operations. Where's the business going? What's next?
Wow. So, like I said before, one of the things that we've been able to do is, over the last 30 years, is evolve to try to stay one step ahead of the threat landscape. So, as organizations move from network to cloud, we evolved and provided cloud security. As organizations started doing remote working. I mean, we've been doing remote security for remote access security for quite some time, endpoint security, mobile security. So I think from a Checkpoint point of view, they will continue to evolve. They will continue to innovate. Checkpoint is a powerhouse when it comes to innovation. Well, we often joke that we're a 25, 27-year-old startup.
I'm glad you guys can still get away with that, because we've been going back 4 or 5 years and we still feel like it's startup.
Yeah, but you have to have that mindset because the threat landscape just evolves so quickly.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I'll give you an example. I think we have one of the largest threat intelligence platform globally, right? And within that threat intelligence platform, we have, I think, just over 40 different engines which are AI driven. So forget the other ones that are doing. I think 40 or so now are AI driven, and over the last few years we've actually moved from machine learning to deep learning capabilities now, right? And I'll tell you a funny, interesting story about this. There's this one particular control that we have where we have 2 different AI engines that are competing against each other to outperform each other in being able to identify threat. And as they outperform each other, the one that outperforms becomes the master until the secondary one can outperform it. So we're doing that kind of really, really cool innovation.
That is cool.
Right. That's just one example. One of the latest things that we've done is we've introduced capabilities around email security. We do something that I don't think anybody else in the world does, which is we're able to prevent threats move laterally inside an organization's email ecosystem. So most email security sits at the MX record level or just in front of your Azure, your Office 365 or G Suite, right? What we've been able to do through API integration is actually integrate our capability, our control, so that we're sitting behind everything. And as an email is being sent from one inbox to another within that organization, we can still interrogate that and we can still look for threats. So that's some really cool stuff that Checkpoint does. And we did this through an acquisition called Evangelist, which is another Israeli company. One of the other really cool thing that we've done is an acquisition called Spectral, where we really took this zero trust mindset to the cloud. And really, what I'm talking about here is providing DevOps with tools so they can move to DevSecOps. We've got the whole tool set to go from build time security to runtime security. That stuff with being able to integrate into CI/CD pipeline. That stuff, we've been doing that for quite a few years now. But the latest stuff we do is we can actually validate if a third-party open source code that a developer is downloading, if it's safe or not, if it's got vulnerabilities. So we're able to do that interrogation of the actual source code before it's being used in homegrown applications or whatever applications organizations are writing. So I think that's really cool stuff. And given the fact that we have an incident response team, one of the things we noticed is that there's a lot of the managed service providers, the MDR, managed detection and response capability, is all around detection. The problem with that is that when you're focusing on detection, the damage is done.
Yep.
Right. Now, I'll give you one use case for this. Imagine a water supply. Now, we've already seen a couple of attacks on water supply where threat actors tried to change the chemical level so that it would actually be hazardous to health.
Jeez.
Right? They were literally trying to poison the water. You can't rely on a managed detection and response capability here, because by the time you may detect this stuff, people could potentially get harmed in the future, right? So it's really important that you prevent attacks, and that's one of the key ethos that Checkpoint has, mindset of that we've got to try and prevent attacks. So we've actually released our own capability around managed detection and response, and we call it managed prevention and response. So it's essentially SOC as a service, but our capabilities are there to prevent the attacks in the first place. Obviously, there'll be something that may get through, and then you automate the remediation capability. But the initial attempt is to make sure we prevent attacks.
Yep.
So that's something really cool that we've released to the market, and part of that is our SOC as a service. We provide full XDR capability as well, or XPR as we call it, extended prevention and response. Right.
Cool.
Again, so because we secure cloud ecosystem, so we do the whole gamut of cloud ecosystem. We protect build time security, runtime security, network security from having virtual security gateways, workload protections, all of that kind of stuff with cloud security posture management capabilities. So we've got all of that. We've got our full stack of network security. We've got full stack of endpoint security with EDR capability. We secure mobile phones. So, if anybody downloads a malware or any malicious app, we will be able to identify that because we detonate that in cloud as well, and we make a call whether it's malicious or not. All of that kind of stuff as well. And so if you think about it, that's actually what an XDR is.
Yeah. I think you're right that cybersecurity is definitely evolving to a place where you need someone looking in your environment separate to the people that are doing the help desk or internally IT support or whatever, right? Because they get flooded with alerts from firewalls and antivirus tools and that kind of thing. You really need someone looking 24/7 for threats and detecting it, but also, you're right, actually preventing it and responding and doing something within a certain time period. So, Ashwin, thanks for coming in, mate. Really appreciate you sharing insights. I hope the audience has got a lot of value out of that first 100 days as a CISO. I think it's pretty valuable. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.